Hello all. Now I wanted to get back to my quarterly Musings video. These Generalities videos, of course, if you're new, are usually just my political rambles, and also using some of the themes on the channel with recent discussions, and trying to put theory into actual practice, since the demand for that is can never go dry, I suppose. But anyway, so first I wanted to, of course, talk about the perpetual election cycle that we always find ourselves in. And so, just to start off, I wanted to look at how Trump, of course, as expected, announced his re-election campaign, and I would say that he has very good odds to ultimately become the next Grover Cleveland in American history, and certainly he's my favorite to win the presidency in 2024. But of course, there is a lot of obstacles in the meantime, and certainly this indictment and his appearance in court, and funny enough, when we see that he's scheduled for his next court appearance in, I think it's like December, which of course is leading into the first primaries of the GOP, and we can perhaps see that this is going to be something that's going to try to cast doubt on not just never Trumpers, to keep them from perhaps jumping on these sort of Romney conservatives, if you will. And of course, you also have the independent voters trying to keep them away, although there is now polling that suggests that there is this subset of people who are so fed up with Bidenomics that despite actually saying that Trump deserves to be to serve time, or have a very steep consequences, they still would actually vote for him in a election. So you have about 1 in 5 people who say Trump deserves to go to jail, but he was so much better at the job than his replacement. Then that's certainly something to keep an eye on as we continue to go down, quite frankly, a recession, which we'll get into. But of course, with Trump being in, there's other GOP candidates. Most of them aren't worth really mentioning, to be honest, other than the speculation that Ron DeSantis is going to jump in perhaps next month. There's been talks of having a big announcement down in Florida next month, and there's also something to be said that if he continues, if he is going to run, I think that he shouldn't. I think that he should use the fact that he is barely 50 years old to his advantage and just sit this one out. I don't think that in a head-to-head matchup, most of the GOP wants to face Trump, who's very versatile in the moment. He seems to create these really mimetic, linguistic even tactics that can actually end someone's political career. So I would say actually sit out, but there's a lot of speculation that he will do well against Trump, and I think that he definitely has the best shot against Trump. But ultimately, I don't see him really able to pull himself away from the branding that Trump has done, among conservatives, where, allegiance to him is really paramount almost to the identity of being on the conservative right, at the moment at least. And so, trying to overcome that branding and not piss off, a huge proportion of your fan base. I'd say there's about a third and maybe even growing amount of support for Trump within the GOP that is not going to vote for anyone else and will not trust anyone else under any circumstance. And I think that a lot of these people, although, I'm not a Trump super fan by any stretch, they're not exactly wrong about allegiance to, one, an incumbent, ultimately. He has been president before. And two, there's this, camaraderie, if you will, that Trump has been embarrassed and hung out to dry by the elites, so many times now in this vendetta, quite frankly. Which is also interesting that he did do that town hall with CNN and actually performed very well. I think a lot of independents would be interested in that performance, and also seeing him actually show up to CNN programming. It was a big victory for him, I would say, especially across platforms. And then, of course, you have the liberals freaking out that he was even platformed to begin with. And CNN found themselves worse for wear, while Trump, walked away from the situation with a lot to gain. And of course, one of the reasons why Trump is constantly at war with old guard media, quite frankly, is because he's able to, maneuver around these people. But perhaps this time he actually does need these people, to the extent that he is still choosing not to be active on Twitter. I don't think that he, in the long run, can keep that up. And I know that there is some T's and dotted I's, if you will, with regards to the legalese of him using Truth Social as his distinct platform as opposed to Twitter. I've heard that argument before. But, ultimately, he does need to get back on Twitter because of the importance of transmitting those messages without having to, have it reified through media members that, quite frankly, don't like him. And so, watching him still try to do this without his Twitter reach is quite interesting, and will continue to be. But, I'm still willing to stand by that. I do think that he is a shoo-in for the sort of unsayable, in that sort of Wittgenstein sense. Now, of course, this isn't specifically what Wittgenstein would say about the unsayable, but I did like to appropriate this cultural unsayable of having a greater understanding within the social systems, understanding really, quite frankly, English, and it's hyperbole to see the unsayable with regards to Trump very likely, for YouTube's sake, had a honking moment in 2020 with his re-election, and so it is, still considered an unsayable to really bring up the fact that he has a sort of, organic, even redemption arc with regards to him getting, revenge against an election that was quite dubious, quite frankly. If anyone who has paid attention to the so-called democratic standards that we have applied to other nations with regards to stopping the count. But again, we're on YouTube, so I don't want to go too far down the unsayable, quite literally. And so, with regards to that, I do think that there is that aspect here of due revenge, due justice, and I think that that's one of the reasons why he also will be able to unify so many people in the GOP, because of course, his incumbency, but of course because of this allegiance towards giving the finger to the establishment, quite frankly. And as we saw in the last week or two, moving on, Durham gives Trump a big boost among the independents. And of course, this sort of information just doesn't really get out beyond party lines. You're not going to see anyone really on the left cover the fact that the Clintons and the Obama administration, quite frankly, did everything they could to stymie an incoming administration and colluded with and helped to try to maneuver through 2016 and keep things quite frankly so hush that you weren't even really allowed to actually within the agencies talk about some of these intelligence briefings and actually report on them for the sake of if this ever got out. It's very, very dubious. And so, once again, Trump, in the long haul here, ends up walking away with another, moral victory with regards to that. But of course, how far does that really get you when many independents won't ever bother to ask these kind of questions or look into it because it's been a few years now. And of course, the other people where it's just fodder and they aren't going to believe you anyway because they aren't coming at you with good faith. And I do think there was this missed opportunity, though, if Elon is stepping away as CEO, which is a whole other thing. I think that Trump should have perhaps made his comeback while Elon was on top there. I think it would have been very noteworthy, very symbolic in a sort of way, of a sort of new way, a new guard, as we'll get to with regards to Tucker Carlson and his show being Twitter-based, really. And, there was an opportunity here to really symbolically put forth that message of, there's a new paradigm, a new way of media and politics. One of the antagonisms, though, I think you could see culturally is this fast-paced, attention diverting, if you will, attention span on the internet, this sort of on-demand, in-demand, hyper-modern experience with regards to, internet and speed and resources on here. The framework of our nation state, with regards to the sort of bureaucratic, legal, slow-moving process, I think that you could say, comes from the Anglo tradition, the Anglosphere. As we see in radical politics in other countries, such as, South America, coups and, changing an entire constitution from an administration to another. In many cases, over the decades, this is something that's actually expected, to ratify a new constitution when, a new democratic power or party comes into being. Then, whereas, of course, in the Anglo tradition, these processes are much slower. There's literally checks and balances written within, of course, to stop sweeping institutions. And of course, on the channel, these sort of social changes are rather, slow in Anglo society, even though, all the metaphors and the analogies as they go with regards to slow cooking the toad, if you will. So it is an interesting dichotomy, really, to see between this on-demand. Where's the action? We're constantly saying our politics don't represent us, and they move so slow. You never see anything actually happening, and this is again with regards to our actual tradition within government and how we see the state itself with the slow moving evolution, of course, with Darwin. Is this sort of Anglo way of slow change, of observed processes over time with your relationship to the environment, and it's this slow, gradual moving of a species. And I think these analogies and, quite frankly, forms of government and how our institutions operate is imperative to understand going forward. But of course, this wouldn't be a right-wing video, if you will, in the last couple of months if we didn't talk about Bud Light and, of course, all of the social outcry, the affirmations even as well, and the boycotting. I think sales dropped 20 or 30%. And of course there is some camaraderie there with, every once in a while, it's nice to look around and see, there are millions of people who also affirm what you have to say or what you think is wrong or what, you don't think is really right. And, every once in a while, even though we can talk about, the actual usefulness of this, and what that actually means and how it seems like we're always just in this sort of agitative state of constantly being, quite frankly, reactionaries, quite literally, to every regime talking point. But we don't want to end up being just on the end of our string, just gnawing at shadow puppets all the time. And there's a lot of, still to this day, boomer economics, if you will, ways of seeing this sort of advertisement by a largely considered conservative brand. There's classic commentary with how could they do such a thing, what were they thinking, why would they do such a, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. But this of course still sees things like capital as a sort of dollars and cents, and as opposed to the way I've been trying to look at it on the channel is actual power dynamics themselves, and seeing that the main feature is, of course, mitigating your risks. And so if Bud Light thinks that they could actually make a risk without totally plummeting into obscurity, then that doesn't actually bode well for us at all. They clearly think that they can manage such a risk with regards to having 30 or 40% of your clients just disappear overnight because you alienated them. If this was just simple economics of yesteryear with these multinational corporations are just selling us piss beer, then they would be just straightforward, and they likely would have never launched such an ad. But since it's become such a really a financialization, as classic Marxian lens would say with regards to capital and risk assumptions are straying further away from the actual land land economies as was put forth, and so then you can have multinational corporations that really don't have any allegiance to their actual patronages as regards to capitulating to the regime and donors or ideologically driven people perhaps within such an organization who clearly demonstrate that they're more valuable than just a couple of shareholders getting angry about this. But there's also that sort of American belief of controversy and its creation of profits long term, and that's actually something really interesting to perhaps look at within our culture of our nation, with branding and the selfhood being totally separate, the sort of external goods, if you will, in the McIntyre sense that we've done on the channel recently, as opposed to the prospects of internalized goods and internal knowledge and its relationship to games or craftsmanship. And instead you have this sort of selfhood of branding where the self can't even be articulated with his true selfhood, because he has to put up this sort of bravado social media mask, or I have to carry myself a certain way, I have to troll, I have to do all these sort of branding techniques, really the self becomes even further secondary, that sort of authentic real self, away from commodifying yourself, if you will. It just continues to divorce itself, and you see this all the time culturally, and boxing is a big example, the fight game, if you will, right now, if you pay attention to it. You have a bunch of celebrities who have no background, of course, with fighting, who have branded themselves into actually getting people to pay money to see them fight without ever actually having any sort of expertise in fighting itself. And so you've ultimately branded something, created something off on its own, where even the identities of the people themselves are mystified and lost, because this person isn't being actually who they really are. They don't actually mean what they're saying to the media. It's for pop and stance, and it's interesting to perhaps look at it from that angle, and how just as McIntyre says about the Enlightenment, with seeing identity as a whole unit, and how it's flipped in modernity, and you just have these different benchmarks, different trades, different brandings of expertise, and they're totally unrelated. They're supposed to be totally neutral. If this person can just do their job, then who cares what they do with their lives outside of that, totally forgetting everything's always related to each other socially. And so there's this sort of burden that goes with that, and how you care and take onto oneself, even in the supposed most bare forms of existence, or the most hyper individualist you can think of, ultimately is still moored into this social cohesion whose decision makings will, affect others around them. And so you can't just carry your life off to the side somewhere else, away from everyone else as much as you think you can. And of course, I think that goes into the American psyche. It's been a really amusing meme I've seen lately with now I haven't watched this show myself, so perhaps I'm going to shoot myself in the foot by talking about it. But there's this, talk of this Yellowstone meme. And so, you have these rough country people who, totally end up adopting the regime's talking points simply because, it doesn't actually affect them. And so, how does that actually look like without, somewhere like Yellowstone or Wyoming and the population density, how the American psyche and how it's always, had that sort of manifest destiny with it, always, moving to the spatial ends, from ocean to ocean. And, this goes, of course, with the thinking of the man in his own island and his own way is able to go down his own life path, using that spatial quality towards it, and how when you have a couple acres, your politics likely would be one of space and leaving one alone, and no commitment to, or at least none beyond just this sort of Rawlsian obligations of, ultimately just still being the same people in the nation state, but, it's much more deeper than that. But moving on, I wanted to also talk about Larry Elder real quick, since he also launched a campaign. And while, of course, he's not going to perform particularly well, of course, or be expected to win, I do think that they're, and one of the ways we've seen, American politics perhaps be influenced by, more radical elements is by, hijacking certain issues to where you dominate, thinking in this, praxis, if you will. And so you eventually force more mainstream, mainline candidates to actually adopt those positions because you've sucked all the air out of, the certain issues. And I think, the border with regards to Trump was also one of his big selling points, and one of the things that ultimately, got him where he needed to be in 2016. And of course, we see the border crisis actually getting worse, but of course, again, that's only if you are not committed to actually detailing or, looking at the situation, simply because, as we've seen, issues seem to come and go with the inheritance to the halls of power, where, the border will become an issue again if there's a conservative majority. And just as the border suddenly is, an unsayable, if you will, when it comes to the Democrats in control, and, you're starting to see people actually die in the care of those people. Of course, in a fair landscape, then this would be, treated the same, and you would, have a sort of dialogue about this. But of course, as you say, it's largely just of patronage and allegiance to use these issues, to use these people, quite frankly, to further themselves when necessary. And so of course, now I wanted to move on to another one of the big happenings over the last couple of months, and that is certainly with Tucker Carlson's leaving of Fox News, is now looking to go to Twitter with his show. And of course, this can be an exciting prospect with regards earlier to what I said about, a new frontier, or, new media, new ways of thinking. Now, I don't know if it will be ultimately a huge success, but it definitely is interesting to see that someone actually with viewing potential on a mainstream basis actually, dive, full throttle into an internet-based medium completely. There's no, use of some super conglomerate media network or cable provider, if you will, now. And so, one of the things, though, I do think that is worth mentioning, and I did give Tucker, hard times on occasion with some of the things that I thought that he could have been saying all along, but, he was given a pass really for, trying to appease, sustaining his audience, sustaining his, quite frankly, his career of even being able to be platformed. And of course, you have to take with a grain of salt that ultimately he still was purged in the end anyway. And, one of the things that I do think Tucker was valuable with, and ultimately what will be lost, though, since, his show is just going to be on Twitter now, apparently, and that is that Tucker had a way through his Fox News platform of reaching, the older boomer demographics, if you will, and networking and, cudgeling in sort of, our ideas or, new thinking or new ways of looking at race relations or gender relations even, or even formulations of power on a much deeper level, and of course demographics being at the forefront as well. Tucker was able to really facilitate some of these answers and diagnosis from those online chambers that would never be able to reach the sort of audience that Tucker inherited over at Fox News. And so that sort of bridge that his show was able to use as a vehicle to transmit those ideas is really lost now, because they're not going to be able to retain that same audience that isn't so internet savvy. I'm sure plenty of people are going to, of course, jump on board with his new show on the new platform, but it probably won't be the same, because you'll have lost a significant amount of people from stepping away from old guard media. But of course, this is only a step along the way. Old guard media is going the way of the dinosaur, and of course these things do take time. And as we've seen, their sort of audiences collectively really shrink and then participate in these more and more outlandish schemes to really retain that same audience. And so you're seeing, even CNN try to dip into the Fox News, viewer base, try to even get them to perhaps watch, and, the normal CNN appreciator, if you will, doesn't like that. And so in this increasingly polarized, situation, you're actually seeing these partisan networks face the realization that since they've gone in one direction so far, they're not actually able to capitulate out anymore, and so they just continue to have to spiral in that direction. because such a large amount of their audience is now subservient to that. And so, if we're going to look at the economy, of course, which I do on all these generalities videos, we can continue to see, banking issues, recession, which this is an aside here. It's always funny to see these bureaucratic and credential, markers for, what is considered a recession. And ultimately this, I think, in and of itself actually becomes alienating for, the common people, the common, American people who, are looking at, these Wall Street and financial bureaucrats, and they're talking of, oh, is it a recession? Is it not? Is it going to be? How long is it going to be? And what will my investments look like? Of course, these are all concerns, certainly, but there is a sort of alienation with when you have in the span of 2 or 3 years, services and goods go up double, if not triple, in some cases, then that definitely means a hurting economy, a hurting purchasing power. And so these markers are so antiquated, and usually, of course, you can put in. You can usually put in, and plug in sort of attributes, if you will, to try to, minimize, how much inflation was this month, or, use these sort of antiquated measurements just to, try to satisfy, quite frankly, the same media apparatus we were talking about just earlier, that are looking for these partisan pieces. And so trying to paint this rosy picture by adding a bunch of attributes that really are so abstract and lack nuance, even to where you can't just call a spade for a spade and simply say that we're in a downturn. But before I exit here, because I've gone on long enough, there was a string of other things I wanted to get into other than just 2024, which seems to dominate, of course, every political discussion. We're just always in these never-ending, perpetual election cycles, it seems. But I did want to talk about AI just for a second, because it is amusing to see so many people discuss it and take at this novelty of ChatGPT, and this I guess there's one on Snapchat as well. I don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff, but with regards to the AI question, if you will, I always find it amusing just because the way we think about technology, the way technology entices us, it seems way more likely that us ourselves are becoming more AI and NPC like and less sentient over time than questioning whether our sentience is going to be overcome by AI, which of course is a presupposition in and of itself of our own NPC thinking, as it seems like humanity really has we've really in that sort of Heideggerian sense lost our way of actually being a being, and having that dialogue of higher beings where you actually understand your humanity. Now, of course, we would think that we could look at the humanities and those institutions to actually help teach and guide such a task, but sadly that's long gone in the American education system. But it is still interesting to perhaps see people who, and I always forget which student it was that Heidegger discussed about with AI all the way back in the 90s, where Heidegger is very explicit about being in the world, and how being in the world is one of the defining attributes of who we are, quite frankly. And so the the sort of thinking and creativity that comes with that is now lost upon us, simply because we continue to presuppose thinking in the way that has really dominated in the last century with the sciences, and how they actually can't get over their presuppositions themselves, and constantly get hung up on these sort of things of humanity being overcome by the external object, but ultimately our human apprehension of those objects perhaps needs to be questioned as well, to put a bow on the AI question. And also, I wanted to talk about the how, of course, there's the hypocrisy, if you will, of the Nashville shooter, and there's no details really to be known, and how, of course, we have this last week or so, there was a certain multi-ethnic, to say the least, shooting event, and within like 30 minutes there was all these allegations of white supremacy, and of course there is that subtlety of, once again, there's like a not so white guy carrying the banner of the Aryan Brotherhood, and it's sort of amusing, but I'd also put forth, though, that there is something to be said about this, with how I think it's twofold, really. I'd add, one is, of course, ultimately, certainly on the left, the ratification, if you will, the glue to the house, if you will, is ultimately being against whites, and so of course it makes sense why they would extrapolate as such with the enemy, because of course a scapegoat, as I've demonstrated on this channel before in a lot of my hypothesis vids, the scapegoat has a much more durable and mimetic energy, because of course it's a very simplistic going forward, and so what is the right's scapegoat? What is our white people, if you will? And you could say that, well, we should reject that and move away from that, but ultimately, though, there is a sort of figure, or a specter, if you will, a sort of enemy that energizes really and puts forth what they consider as their conception of ideologically misaligned, perhaps, at best, if not just who they consider as evil or a problem. And so it's if you want to be serious in that sort of political access, then you do have to ask these tough questions about, well, what does the scapegoat for reversing that actually look like? And of course, there's many on the right who will have different answers, and so I think the left is much better at being mimetic, if you will, with regards to, okay, eyes on the prize, like, this is ultimately our allies, these are who we pay patronage to, and these are not who we pay patronage to. This is the unrational being, if you will, in that Aristotelian sense of how the Greeks looked at the barbarians. In many ways, we look at each other as barbarians in this ideological 21st century world where technology simultaneously has managed to let us coincide with this sort of plurality, but also has looked to destroy it in any way it possibly could. Because, of course, in order to sustain such pluralities, requires, as the paradox goes, a million times in political theory, tolerance, requires the vanquishing of the intolerant. So, the barbarians need to be vanquished, and so we're on thin ice. Where, on one hand, we're able to live amongst each other, perhaps never before in unique ways of understanding, but at the same time, all of these different forms of understanding are competing against each other, and really kind of creating this sort of Frankenstein monster of neutrality that can actually take a stance, but ultimately has to take one in order to be able to assert that they don't have to actually take a stance. So it's a very covert power dynamic, I would say. But just to put a bow on this video, I did also want to talk about the, as it's referred to, I think on Twitter, as the faltering of complex systems. And this is interesting because, of course, on those my reading of Spengler and technics, I've been one to diagnose that not only is it simply just about brain drain and people are not as wise, quite frankly, or understands really knowledge and craftsmanship, or has that dynamic of actual understanding of internal practices, if you will. And as complex systems have continued to get complex, but at the same time managed to simplify nature's reserve, really, if you will, and be able to just supply someone on demand, despite the fact that they have no background or any knowledge of this. They can just order something off of Amazon or something, and what once could have took tremendous amounts of manpower and technique is done mechanically, and of course the time preference really that explodes out of that. But ultimately, though, part of that process that's overlooked than just simply having less brain power to uphold complex systems. Where's the plumbers? Where's the electricians? Where's the maintenance for all of these nukes? This requires a lot of brain power. You can't just continue to just pass down these systems and expect the same result as the people change. And but ultimately, though, what I think though is most important, as Spengler pointed out in Man and Technics, is technics has a special relationship with the Anglosphere, or the Western man, if you want to call it that, where it's not just about time preference and this is going to minimize time and this is going to maximize my profit, and I've created something that's mechanistically that's going to help society move forward. Of course, that's great, but it's actually the love of the machines itself that distinctly with Faust as a sort of metaphor of the West and its love of forces, and I think a lot of people, miss that point where, it's not just about, sustaining complex systems, but it's also about the relationship with those complex systems and the affirmations and, quite frankly, love to systematize in such a way and in such a mechanistic way as well. But as we've seen in, quite frankly, in the American South now, you're starting to see the faltering of such systems to where, plumbing and other necessities are what once would be considered totally foreign in this country is now slowly creeping into the standard that everyone outside of Northwestern Europe and America has been accustomed to before. And so, just to put the bow on this video, complex systems need maintaining, but also need affirmation as well. And so I hope you guys enjoy this generalities video. I've gone on long enough. These videos have been really long lately, so I hope you guys do enjoy them though, and I'll see you for the next one.